Okay, so there's an unfortunate phenomenon when people are learning philosophy or yoga philosophy or virtually anything new, that if they don't understand what's being taught, they tend to assume that they're just not smart enough to get it, or that their brain just can't learn that particular type of subject. And while there's such a thing as aptitude to some extent, in general, this assumption is wrong. In fact, if you don't understand what is being taught or communicated, the primary reason is that the teacher's pedagogy is not skillful enough. And so that's why I'm making this video, because I've made so far two videos, excuse me, about this topic of the illusion of free will and agency and the unfolding of the pattern and the nature of reality. And responses, some people's responses have shown me that I have not succeeded in communicating well enough for everyone to actually understand the point being made. So, one obvious example is if a content creator looks at the comments of the YouTube video or wherever else it's posted and sees people arguing against a different point than the one that was actually made or attempted, then that's good evidence that the pedagogy is not skillful enough. And this actually happens very, very often. People are arguing against something that's different from the view that's actually being propounded. But like I said, this is all down to the communicator to learn how to communicate more skillfully. Okay, so I'm going to try that now. And in fact, I'm going to try something fairly audacious, which is I'm going to try to advance the conversation on the subject of the illusion of free will beyond where other public intellectuals have been able to get with it. And one, of course, prominent example is Sam Harris, who wrote a book about free will and has done several podcasts on it, and including one long one called Final Thoughts on Free Will, where he tried to nail it as best he could to really drive the point home. And I think that's what he says there is constitutes a brilliant argument as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. It's incomplete. And an incomplete pedagogical strategy is a flawed one. Now, you might kind of question my use of the phrase pedagogical strategy. Why don't you just, say what you think the truth is? Well, that is what I'm doing. But also, the truth can't be said in words. The real ultimate truth about anything cannot be said perfectly in words. So when we choose words, we're always choosing a kind of angle of approach or a strategy of communication to try to get comprehension across. And so in that sense, pedagogy, which is the science of how to communicate or teach effectively, is really relevant. So I think there's something really significant missing from the Sam Harris argument and other people who've, argued this point, the illusion of free will. And maybe I can manage to get it across, because when most anyone hears an argument about the illusion of free will, here's an argument that free will is an illusion, they interpret it to mean predestination, that somehow their strings are being pulled by an invisible puppet master, whether that puppet master is fate or God or the stars or who knows what, right? Predeterminism, sometimes just called determinism, predestination, that this is understood by most people to be the opposite of the idea of free will. Now, when people have an opposition already set up in their minds and you negate one possibility, they assume that you think the other possibility is in fact true. But this is not the case. This is not the case at all. And this assumption is deeply flawed. So when I argue against free will, or the misunderstanding that we call free will, people think I am advocating for the view of predestination or determinism. Now, let me just give an example. Okay. Somebody wrote, what about individual spontaneity? The body-mind process being able to choose, create, and play in random ways, spontaneously, and not in a mechanical, predetermined way. Isn't this possible? Okay, so the question itself reveals the misunderstanding, right? There is the argument here is nothing like predestination or predeterminism, and nothing like the notion that your strings are being pulled, nothing like the notion that you can't freely choose, because you can freely choose. It's just that what you choose has already happened. Okay. And when I say you can freely choose, if that seems to contradict everything I said in the previous two videos, it doesn't, because there I'm referring to an experience. You experientially feel as if you're freely choosing. And indeed, in some sense, you are. You absolutely are. It's just that that free choice is always only going to be exactly what most naturally expresses through the particular sort of body mind that you have. And the particular sort of body mind you have is determined by causes and conditions going all the way back to the beginning of time, the Big Bang, or whatever else you want to posit as the beginning, right? So I'm going to try to really nail down this misunderstanding, because it's so difficult to correct, and indeed it poses a fascinating challenge for the teacher or communicator who understands the view being discussed here. Okay, so one way of talking about this is simply to say that all time already exists. Now, this is well known as a concept in physics, and it's called the space-time loaf, like a loaf of bread, meaning to say, then this is the prevalent theory in physics, by the way, this is not a fringe theory. The prevalent theory is that all space-time already exists, and we can use a metaphor of a big loaf of bread, where when you slice into the loaf of bread, that's a specific moment. Now, this is obviously an incredibly vast, incomprehensibly vast loaf of bread, but still the metaphor holds. When you slice into it, that's a given moment. Now, the present is always now, right? But the number that we assign to now is constantly changing. That's one way that we conceptualize change, right? And so we say, oh, today is, when I'm recording this video, it's 22nd July, 2022. Now, that's an arbitrary number, of course, but the purpose that it serves is to denote the fact that from the point of view of my consciousness, certain things happened before and certain things happened after. So the assignation of the arbitrary number serves no function other than to denote the fact that from the point of view of my consciousness, or anyone else who calls today 22nd July 2022, what happened, those events that we designate as being 21st July seem to have been antecedent, seem to have happened before the events that happened on 22 July. So it's a way of describing conscious experience. It's a way of describing the perspective that one has from one's particular vantage point of consciousness, okay? And in that sense, as well as many other senses, time is not integrally different. It's not inherently different from space, okay? Because I have a vantage point spatially. I can see something right now that you can't see. But in fact, if you were standing right in front of me and looking this direction, you would have a completely different view than I have, right? In other words, your orientation in space determines what you can see spatially, and your orientation of time determines how you experience events. It doesn't mean that there's any ultimate truth to that, right? The present is not actually 22nd July 2022 or any other date. The present is just the context in which conscious experience is occurring, right? It doesn't actually have a date. Again, that's just a way of marking what seems to be before and after, what seems to be arranged in a sort of causal connection from the point of view of my consciousness and probably yours too. But it's not ultimately true, meaning to say all time, all space-time actually exists already. It's all here right now, meaning the fact that we call today doesn't mean that any other day is not also today, right? In fact, every day throughout history is today. It's just a matter of what vantage point you have on space-time. It seems to you that this day is subsequent to some other day from your current vantage point. And if you walk a little ways to yonder hill, you're going to have a different vantage point. You're going to see something different that you couldn't see from over here. And in the same way, if you walk a little bit into what we call tomorrow, you're going to see something different, but it's not actually ever tomorrow. It's only ever today, right? Okay, so this is all hopefully perfectly comprehensible. Here's where it gets weird. The entire space-time loaf already exists, meaning everything has already happened. It couldn't be otherwise. And now, how do we know that that's true? We can know that that's true both scientifically and spiritually. It's known spiritually through an intuition that simply arrives unbidden at a certain point in your spiritual practice. But it's known scientifically as well. And this is how. You can read about this in The Fabric of Space-Time by Brian Greene or many other great physics books that are out there. If an alien very, very far away, like on the other side of the galaxy, had a super powerful telescope and was looking at Earth, and the telescope was so powerful that they could see to the level of, sort of what we're doing, human activity on planet Earth, okay? If the alien is traveling away from us at the time that they're looking through their super powerful telescope, they will see into our past. And of course, I'm simplifying things here a bit because relativity is complicated and motion is what creates these different contexts or these different vantage points of perception, right? But the point is, if the alien is when not moving, is occupying what we call now, then if they then move away from us and look at us, they'll see into our past. And if they then turn around and move towards us, then looking through their super powerful telescope, they can see into our future. They can see what we have yet to do, what we're about to do. Now, please trust me that even though I didn't explain it well, partially because I have very little time to try to explain it, that this is totally accepted by all the physicists who have jobs, who are employed, who are professors, who are respectable. This is totally accepted. I'm not talking about some crazy fringe theory, right? And the same holds for us. If we developed a super powerful telescope where we could see alien activity on the surface of a planet far, 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 far away, it has to be far away for this to work. And when we're going around the sun towards that alien planet, we would see the future of what we would see when we're going around the sun away from that alien planet. Then we would see into the relative past compared to what we saw when we were moving towards the alien planet. Okay. The point is, this is uncontroversial, but the implications of it are hard for people to accept. The implication is simply that, well, all time already exists. If the aliens can see our future, exactly what we're about to do, then it's already done. Everything's already done. Everything's already accomplished. And as a piece of embodied consciousness, you're not a piece, right? Actually, it's just a figure of speech. But as a vantage point of consciousness, you are traversing the space-time loaf. You're traversing the landscape of space-time. And if you can traverse space-time, it's the same thing, but the landscape is already there. Okay, now, none of this contradicts everything that you want to believe is real in terms of what you think is free will, meaning to say you get to choose freely, no force is acting on you and making you choose. You get to be spontaneous, you get to play, you get to be random, you get to be weird, whatever you want, or you get to be non-spontaneous and non-weird if you want, right? That all is real. The thing is, it's just all already happened, and it couldn't be otherwise because you are exactly as you are, meaning to say, you're either a spontaneous sort of person or you're not. Now, that's not a binary, actually, right? So you have, like, if you were, if we could quantify it, we could say you have 58% spontaneity rating compared to the most spontaneous person ever, who's 100%, or the least, which is 0. Let's say you have 58% spontaneity rating. That's how you are. And so that means that you're going to behave spontaneously 58% of the time, or 20%, or 1%, or whatever it actually is. Now, I'm not saying it's actually quantifiable. Please try to understand. I'm not saying that. It's not actually quantifiable. It's just a way of speaking, right? That you are constituted in the way that you are. So you're going to be as spontaneous as you are, or as unspontaneous. You're going to be a methodical deliberator sometimes and not other times. But the key here is nobody could ever possibly step outside space-time. Nobody could step outside the matrix of causes and conditions. And therefore, what do you mean by free will? Right? It's like saying I could be different from how I am if I chose to. Well, no, you can't. How could you, right? And if you choose to undergo different sorts of experiences that change your personality, then you were always the sort of person who would choose to undergo different sorts of experiences that change your personality, right? So once you get this, it's really simple. It's really simple. So if then this description of the nature of reality doesn't mean that you're not free in all the ways that you want to be free, then what's the point of it? What's it actually communicating? Well, if you actually get what's being talked about here, you become truly, irrevocably free from guilt, from regret, from self-recrimination, from self-loathing, and from self-assault and beating yourself up, right? Let that sink in. You really do. You can become free of all those things because you know in your bones, not just your head, if you get this view, that you couldn't have been different than how you were at any given moment. And so, of course, you were going to make the mistakes that you did. You had to. And of course, you're going to make the mistakes you have yet to make. You have to. Okay. Now, you get to be, if you understand this, grok it, get it on the embodied level, then you do get to be free of guilt, regret, self-recrimination, etc., but not necessarily grief. In fact, grief is a healthy, normal response when you have unwittingly inflicted pain on someone else. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, you really hurt me, and you go, oh, well, I couldn't help it. There's no free will. So whatever, get out of my face. Then you're using the teaching here presented for what's called spiritual bypassing. You're using it to try to exempt yourself from the very real, important human moment of facing and acknowledging the unintended consequences of your actions and grieving them. Other times you get to celebrate them, so it all comes out in the wash, okay? But grieving the unintended consequences of your actions need not include any guilt, regret, self-recrimination, or self-loathing. And if you can grieve the consequences of your actions when they facilitate pain for others without any of those things, that shows you have actually understood this teaching that doesn't in any way impinge on your freedom as you understand it, right? So from the point of view of a given vantage point in time, like this one that we call 2022, the pattern of existence is still unfurling, right? It's like the Big Bang is sometimes compared to, a very, very tightly wound top. And then boom, it starts spinning, and it spins and spins and spins and eventually spins down. There's other metaphors that one could use, and none of them are quite adequate. But the idea is that everything was set in motion at the beginning, and then it all unfurls according to the initial conditions of the system, including a degree of randomness. Okay, so this is, I'm trying to just do a little postscript here to close the last doubt, to close the door on the final doubt about this doctrine, because people say, wait, are you talking about determinism? Everything is determined. There's no such thing as randomness. No, there's such a thing as quantum randomness. It's a very, very small effect as far as we can tell, right? But still it exists. And because of that, you can only know the location of an electron to a very high degree of probability, not 100% until you measure it, right? And in that way, then people say, oh, so the future isn't determined. Well, it depends what you mean by determined. The future has already happened, including whatever degree of randomness actually exists, okay? So randomness is part of the pattern. Some small degree of randomness is part of the pattern, but it can't be the locus of your alleged free will, because determination plus randomness, where in that system do you somehow stand outside of the whole matrix and exercise a choice free of both determination and randomness? Well, obviously you don't. Okay, so a degree of randomness, as implied by quantum mechanics, a small degree, does not alter any of this. Okay, so that's just the little postscript to close the door on that potential misunderstanding. Okay, so who knows? maybe I succeeded a little bit better this time. And why bother? Why try to communicate about this? Well, because I feel inspired to to exactly this degree, 3 videos. You're not going to see another video. This is the degree to which I feel the inspiration. I can't help the degree of inspiration I have. I have this much, no more, no less. Okay. But it's all experienced as a choice. I chose to make this video, right? But again, that's the sort of person I am, and I couldn't be otherwise, right? So, am I moved by love and care and concern? Absolutely, right? Again, it's not mechanistic. I make the videos because I really hope that some of you watching the video get this to an extent that would free you from suffering, at least some measure of suffering. But if you really get this, it's going to free you from the lion's share of suffering. And I want that for you. So that's what we call love or care or concern or something. It doesn't matter what you call it. And I have that, but of course, I didn't choose that. I have that to whatever degree I do. And so here am I spending time and effort in trying to present things in such a way that there's a click deep inside, right? Because understanding it conceptually doesn't change your life. And that's a curious phenomenon that as far as I know, neuroscience has as yet failed to describe this difference scientifically, the difference between getting it as a concept and getting it in what we can only call a somatic way or an experiential way or an embodied way or grokking, to use Heinlein's term. We don't really have a good word for it, do we? Because the distinction is not clearly acknowledged in our wider culture, despite the fact that it is surely the most important distinction that we could possibly make. Because when you understand a proposition about the nature of reality conceptually, it doesn't change your life. It's just interesting. It makes you go, oh, wow, cool idea. And maybe you'll try to share it at a cocktail party or whatever. But if you understand the proposition at this deeper level that we don't have a good word for, it's utterly life-changing. You will never suffer in that way again. You can be free of regret, guilt, self-loathing, and self-recrimination. You actually can. And many of us who have gone through this process are evidence of that, right? It's not that, it's not, it doesn't free you from every possible form of suffering, God knows, but a huge whack of it, Okay. Hope this contemplation is interesting, profound, and life-changing for you. Please keep thinking about it, not just thinking about it, feeling into it. See if you can get this on a deeper level than just the thoughts, the words. Om.